on the waterfront there, while dozens more ignored social distancing rules at a park in Eccles.
Thomas Dunn reporting. Thomas, thank you for that. 9 minutes before 8 is the time. Remember, after 9, Sir Keir Starmer here taking your calls on LBC. Call Keir. Be sure to get those through. That's the opposition. Let's talk about the government. Let's bring into the conversation First Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary, the man who, of course, was at the helm during Boris Johnson's illness from coronavirus. I speak of Dominic Raab, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on the show, Mr. Raab. The overnight reaction seems perhaps a little puzzled to what we've heard from the Prime Minister. How embarrassing is it that the leaders of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have rejected your new mantra?
I don't think it's a question of being embarrassed. We've had a very good collaboration with the devolved administrations. Actually, social distancing has remained very consistent in terms of compliance across the 4 nations. But we've always recognised that at some stage or other, based on the individual judgment call that the First Ministers may make about what's going on in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, that we may proceed at slightly different speeds. Happens in other countries around the world. I spoke to the German Foreign Minister last night. He was explaining to me how it was working with the German Länder, the state system there. So we want to strive to keep a UK-wide approach here as far as possible, but we've always recognised that there may be different views as to how to proceed in one or other of the nations based on the circumstances and the progress made with the virus there.
But how is one meant to stay alert about a virus?
Well, let me give you an example.
Please.
One of the things we've said is that we're going to encourage and allow people to go out for exercise more than once a day and indeed to go and enjoy the outdoors, as long as they socially distance. Let me give you a concrete example. If someone wants to go out with another member of their household to have a game of tennis, that's something that you can do while staying 2 metres apart. What you couldn't then do is go and mill around the clubhouse with lots of people where you'd all be very close together. So that's a good example of, as we transition, just one area, but where we take steps, people can get back to something resembling life as normal.
Can't play doubles then, Mr. Raab?
Well, you could if they're all 4 within the household, so mum and dad against brother and sister. But
right.
what you get the
That's
sense.
a little
what
unfair.
I'm saying.
Maybe we should put mum the other side. Mum and brother and dad and sister. That sounds a fair.
I'll let you fix that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that as we take some of those steps, as life gets back to something resembling normal, we do still need to stay alert, because you can play tennis, but you can't be mixing with other people who are from outside your home or your household closer than 2 metres without us risking the virus spiking again.
But of course, if you lived on the Welsh border, you could exercise, but you can't actually go over the border into Wales, of course, because you'd be breaking their laws.
Well, we've got a devolved settlement.
But that is strange, isn't it, Mr. Raab? Let's be honest.
Well, we've got different rules and regulations that apply in all 4 nations. But of course, we want to try and keep as much of the advice UK-wide as possible. And what we will do is we'll respect the right of the Welsh Executive to take their decisions at the right moment that they deem for them.
So I can't work from home, so I am now allowed to go to work. Am I meant to go to work today or on Wednesday? When am I meant to go back to work, Mr. Raab?
So the advice is that those people that can work from home should continue to work from home.
Yes.
But where you can't work from home, construction, manufacturing, those big economically valuable sectors, from Wednesday people should go back. And we've done a lot of work, and the employers have done a lot of work to make sure that they can do so in what we're calling COVID secure settings. So the distancing, the hygiene, the other precautionary measures are in place. And we do want to encourage that because the economy needs it as well. So we want to protect life and public health, but we also want to protect livelihoods.
And how will that work as regards public transport, Foreign Secretary?
So if at all possible, we want people to go via other means, so cycling, walking, taking the car. But if not, and it's essential to go by public transport, then we'll have the measures in place. The guidance will be published the 50-page document will be published today at 2:00, and there'll be further guidance specifically for public transport. But obviously we can't go back to a situation where the tube or the buses were as full as they were before. So specific social distancing measures will have to be put in place, and clear guidance will be provided for that.
And will there be personnel to help? Like, I'm going to use the word marshals to ensure that not too many people get on a tube train or a bus or an overground train. How will that actually work in practical terms?
Well, as I said, the full guidance will be set out both today and then on Tuesday so that people can go back with some clarity on Wednesday. But there'll be very clear guidance and advice both set out by the government but also by the operators themselves in the way you described.
How has life changed? If you are 70 or above and healthy, you have no existing health concerns, how has life changed? Are you now allowed out?
Yes, so we're saying that actually you should stay at home as much as possible. That's generally the advice and the guidance for people because we know it limits transmission. But we are also saying that if you, and there's no age limit on this, if you want to go out either for exercise or to enjoy the outdoors and you can socially distance, so you can stay 2 meters apart, then that's fine. And in fact, we would understand and encourage people to do it for health and for mental health reasons.
So a grandmother or father still can't actually hug their grandchild if they're not in the same household?
It's heartbreaking, but that's the reality. And one of the things that we need to try and avoid is transmission of the virus through children who are unlikely to suffer from it, but who could still be carriers on to other people, particularly the elderly and the vulnerable. My mum's birthday was over the weekend. We couldn't go and my mum and stepfather couldn't hug our two boys, and it's heartbreaking. But we just got to take these steps in a measured, conditioned, carefully monitored way, so we don't let the virus back in, and to see it revive above the R level 1, which is the point at which we risk a second spike, and then we're back into lockdown. So I'm afraid some of these sacrifices do still need to be made.
And what of the travel industry? Can you lay out the position as you and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet have decided the country must move forward there, Mr. Raab?
Well, we're still advising against all but essential global travel. So we are saying people shouldn't travel abroad. And we've also said, because we've got the virus down to a lower level, this is the moment at which the scientific and medical advice is that we should start thinking about, and we're aiming for the end of the month, putting in place what's called self-isolation, so 14 days isolation for anyone coming into the UK from abroad. And the reason that we're doing that is once the level of the virus and the rate of transmission gets below a certain level, the risk, which hasn't been here before, that people who are not necessarily showing symptoms but carrying the virus from abroad come in, could then spark a second spike. So that's a measure that we'll take for people coming into the UK within the next few weeks, but we're aiming for the end of the month.
But there's a reciprocal deal done between our government and the French government, so it won't apply to passengers from France, is that correct?
So there'll be a range of exceptions so that we can do this in a targeted and focused way. So, for example, we'll maintain the common travel area in Northern Ireland, and the Prime Minister spoke to President Macron last night. We know that freight is critical between the short straits, Dover-Calais, and we'll make sure we've got reciprocal common sense measures to keep that flow going. And we'll work those out together with the French over the next few weeks.
The TUC have described it as a recipe for chaos. While that possibly is understandable given their position, isn't there going to be a challenge that they'll be concerned some of their workers that you'll need to work on the tubes, to work on the buses, to work on the trains? There may be real labour issues, employment issues here, Mr. Raab.
Well, of course, we're very conscious of the situation for workers and indeed for employers, which is why we've taken these steps very modestly from Wednesday. It's why we're going to be releasing a 50-page document at 2 o'clock. All the requisite guidance will be out, the subsequent guidance will be out on Tuesday for employers for using public transport. But we're absolutely focused on making sure it's safe from a public health point of view. We protect health, we protect lives, but we also protect people's livelihoods. And I think there is a sense that we need to make sure that we've got a roadmap to keep the economy going through this very difficult period, and also allow people to get their way of life back to something resembling normal. So we'll take this in a very targeted, measured, conditioned way, and no areas of employment will be opened up that aren't COVID secure for workers.
And lastly, thinking of the major cities such as London, but there are other cities that have parking restrictions that have been relaxed and congestion zones. I appreciate a lot of this is devolved to local government, but will you be urging that congestion charge, parking restrictions continue to be lifted?
Well, we recognise the prerogatives that those councils or local authorities or regional authorities have, but what we're saying and what we would encourage people to do is follow the UK-wide advice, which is to stay home where you can work from home, but otherwise, when you're getting back to work, construction, manufacturing, the sectors we're starting with from Wednesday, and we'll be looking at other measures from the 1st of June and then the 4th of July, is that we want people to be able to drive, cycle and walk where possible, and of course we'd want to see the local guidance and regulations shaped and crafted around that central advice wherever possible.
Yeah, but we don't stay home anymore now, do we, Mr. Raab? We have a new mantra now, of course, don't we?
Well, what we're saying is where possible people should still stay at home. We want to avoid the interaction.
I thought I had to stay alert, so I'm confused now. Have I got to stay at home and stay alert? This never ends.
No. No. We're increasing the number of exceptions and the number of opportunities for people to go back to work and do some of the things that they want to do. But you're absolutely right. We need to stay alert, because as we get the virus down and well below the R level 1, we're now somewhere between 0.5 and 0.9. When the transmission rate of the virus comes down, we want to avoid a second spike. That's why we all need to stay alert, from government right the way through to people, for example, whether they're at work or whether they're going outdoors.
Did you send her a gift?
I did.
What?
I did Moonpig for the first time as well. Can't have Moonpig go.
Oh, did you? That was rather good. Was she happy?
I think she was happy. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Well, happy birthday to, if her name is Mrs. Raab, or to Dominic Raab's mum, whatever her name may be. Thank you for appearing. Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Thanks for being here on LBC, where the news at 1 minute after 8 is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, I'm Simon Conway. The Prime Minister is being urged to provide more clarity on his plan to gradually ease the coronavirus lockdown.